that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually.
But in general, these are people who thought the election was stolen. They had some evidence to support that view. It was not a free and fair election. You don't have to believe that the voting machines were rigged to look at 2020 and say that wasn't fair. We changed the way that we vote. We did it by mail. Of course, there was massive fraud. I mean, these are real concerns. Whether they swung the election, we can argue. But these people had a reason to be frustrated. Democracy, which they really believed in, turned out to be kind of fake.
Tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech. The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Hey, it's Tucker Carlson.
Hey, Tucker.
You often hear people say the news is full of lies, but most of the time that's not exactly right. Much of what you see on television or read the New York Times is in fact true in the literal sense. It could pass one of the media's own fact checks. Lawyers would be willing to sign off on it. In fact, they may have. But that doesn't make it true. It's not true. At the most basic level, the news you consume is a lie of the stealthiest and most insidious kind. Facts have been withheld on purpose, along with proportion and perspective.
I find this particularly ironic coming from Tucker Carlson, of all people, to have him lecture us on the importance of context and proportion when he was one of the primary peddlers of such great bangers as the election was stolen.
Tucker Carlson attempted to rewrite history by lying to his viewers about the reality of the 2020 election, because guess what? It is the end of October, and we're still hearing about how the election was allegedly stolen from Donald Trump, even though there's overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Let's watch.
I mean, it was never an insurrection. It was a melee, and people got super exercised. I think there were some complicated components. There were clearly a lot of federal informants and or agents in that crowd. Their role is still unknown. We should find out. But in general, these are people who thought the election was stolen. They had some evidence to support that view. It was not a free and fair election. You don't have to believe that the voting machines were rigged to look at 2020 and say that wasn't fair. We changed the way that we vote. We did it by mail. Of course, there was massive fraud. I mean, these are real concerns. Whether they swung the election, we can argue. But these people had a reason to be frustrated. Democracy, which they really believed in, turned out to be kind of fake.
What's the evidence? They believed that the election was stolen. They had evidence to support that view. What evidence? I'd like to see it, because if we're wrong, we should know about it. The only problem is we're not wrong, because there hasn't been a shred of evidence to indicate that there was widespread voter fraud or that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. In fact, what I think is incredibly embarrassing to Donald Trump and his enablers is the fact that we've now had how many audits in Georgia, how many recounts in states like Arizona. And every time it happens, oh wow, would you look at that? Not only was there no evidence of voter fraud, but it turns out that after doing a recount, Biden actually won dozens of more votes than we thought. Embarrassing. How many dozens of court battles did the Trump group need to engage in and lose for us to finally get off this topic? And listen, I had very little love for Hillary Clinton, but I find it hilarious that Republicans and Trump supporters kept claiming that Hillary Clinton didn't concede when she did in fact concede the next day. But they're not taking a second for a little bit of self-reflection, because it's now the end of October and they're still crying about how there was allegedly voter fraud. They're still not accepting the reality, and they're being enabled by Tucker Carlson, who knows full well that the election wasn't stolen.
Or white replacement, the great replacement theory.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered, where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true.
So Tucker, as a good faux populist, or maybe better said, as a right-wing populist, He knows enough to avoid saying this in the way that is overtly racist. He does it more subtly and with code. When he talks about replacing American voters with voters from the third world, he's talking about voters that are mostly brown people or black people. That's it. He's using coded language. So not only is this straight up great replacement stuff, it's also nonsense. And as I've said before, trying to win elections by importing people who are slightly more likely to vote for them in 7 to 9 years when they get citizenship, if they get citizenship, it's a terrible strategy.
Oh.
You are being manipulated. How does that work? Let's see.
You sure know a lot about media manipulation, don't you?
Unjustly arrested for armed robbery, that is not, strictly speaking, a lie. He may have been framed. At this point, there's been no trial, so no one can really say. But if I don't mention the fact that the same man has been arrested for the same crime 6 times before, am I really informing you? No, I'm not.
Great example.
I'm misleading you. And that's what the news media are doing in every story that matters, every day of the week, every week of the year. What's it like to work in a system like that? After more than 30 years in the middle of it, we could tell you stories. The best you can hope for in the news business at this point is the freedom to tell the fullest truth that you can. But there are always limits. And you know that if you bump up against those limits often enough, you will be fired for it. That's not a guess. It's guaranteed.
I love how he's implying basically that he's being fired for telling the truth too much. He's basically like pandering to all the audience that we saw, the people saying that, he flew too close to the sun, he got too close to the truth. What was that a stupid ass conspiracy theory we saw? Blackrock buying what was like 13% shares in Fox News. Or News Corp, also owned Dominion. Not Dominion, the voting machines, by the way, but Dominion, an actual stupid ass mining company that shares the same name. And people are like, "Oh, conspiracy! Yes, Tucker Carlson got fired because he criticized BlackRock." No, that's not why he got fired. But hey, he has to say enough vague stuff that will just confirm people's biases, and they'll love him for it.
Every person who works in English language media understands that. The rule of what you can't say defines everything. It's filthy, really, and it's utterly corrupting. You can't have a free society if people aren't allowed to say what they think is true. Speech is the fundamental prerequisite for democracy. That's why it's enshrined in the first of our constitutional amendments. Amazingly, as of
I know Americans would get super mad at that, but the truth is, some of the more functional democracies in the world actually do have speech restrictions that would never fly in the U.S.
Tonight, there aren't many platforms left that allow free speech. The last big one remaining in the world, the only one, is Twitter, where we are now. Twitter has long served as the
my man's never heard about 4chan, okay? Dude, Twitter, the last bastion of free speech. Have you heard about 4chan? Have you heard about 8chan? You can post the sickest shit on those websites, my man. Like, why you gotta limit yourself? The Twitter ain't got nothing on them. Wait until Elon Musk buys out 4chan.
Our national conversation incubates and develops. Twitter is not a partisan site. Everybody's allowed here, and we think that's a good thing. And yet, for the most part, the news that you see analyzed on Twitter comes...
Also, I like how he's saying this as if this was a timeless thing. Twitter has always been the true bastion of free speech in American society where political thought incubates and develops. That's not quite what you were saying before Elon Musk acquired it, now is it? Well, okay. That's fine.
From media organizations that are themselves thinly disguised propaganda outlets. You see it on cable news, you talk about it on Twitter. The result may feel like a debate, but actually the gatekeepers are still in charge. We think that's a bad system. We know exactly how it works, and we're sick of it. Starting soon, we'll be bringing a new version of the show we've been doing for the last 6.5 years to Twitter. We'll be bringing some other things too, which we'll tell you about. But for now, we're just grateful to be here. Free speech is the main right that you have. Without
considering the quality.
See you soon.
Considering the quality of the Twitter video player, I'm worried for Tucker Carlson. I don't know what this is going to mean for him. You are right about everything you said, but the problem is that you are just as guilty as those you accuse of doing these things. How many times have you set narratives without telling all of the facts? You tell the facts that you want to use for your narrative while leaving the exculpatory facts out. Are you willing to admit that? And Elon Musk, the reply guy, flies right into Tucker's rescue. Well, not quite, actually. Not quite. On this platform, unlike the one-way street of broadcast, people are able to interact, critique, and refute whatever he or anyone may say. And, of course, anything misleading will get community notes. I also want to be clear that we have not signed a deal of any kind whatsoever. Tucker is subject to the same rules and rewards of all content creators. Rewards means subscriptions and advertising revenue share, still working on software needed for latter, which is a function of how many people subscribe and the advertising views associated with his content. I hope that many others, particularly from the left, also choose to be content creators on this platform. Dinesh D'Souza with the dick riding. Wow, no deal? This makes Tucker's decision all the more impressive. He's going with free speech on the market. That's the best way to go. That's not really, I mean, sure. We'll see how much money he makes off of Twitter. I guess we won't, because it's not going to be public anyways. I don't know. All I want to say is I fucking called it, okay? He was not going to go silent into the dark night. We were going to have to see him again and again. And all this means is that as much as Twitter has been taken over by, like, Elon Musk reply guys and blue check marks, now it's going to be taken over by Tucker Carlson's boomer demographic. All those people are going to fucking ride in on Twitter and take over the place. We'll see if that's all that happens. Maybe Elon's right. Maybe leftist content creators will also show up on Twitter and it will become the marketplace of ideas. Or maybe it'll just become a right-wing shit show. Was stochastic terrorism on television not free speech enough for him? Apparently not. And interestingly enough, him doing stochastic terrorism, a stochastic terrorist, wasn't actually critiquable. Whereas, you know, it wasn't obfuscating facts, misrepresenting things, recontextualizing things in the wrong way. That was not what Tucker was doing, apparently. All this to say, yeah, we're gonna have a lot of future Tucker Carlson content to cover, I guess. I'm surprised he didn't take an actual contractual agreement with any platform with his size. He could have, but he doesn't really need to. He probably long term he probably makes better money just fully owning his own brand at this point. So it's actually a smart move from him.